The idea of two legendary warrior cultures meeting in battle has fascinated historians, writers, and fans of ancient warfare for generations. On one side stand the Spartans, the iron-hearted defenders of Greece, immortalized in tales of their unwavering discipline, their unmatched cohesion, and their willingness to sacrifice everything for their city-state. On the other side stand the samurai, the noble warriors of feudal Japan, bound by the code of Bushido, skilled with blades that have become legendary for their sharpness, and trained not only in war but in philosophy, poetry, and loyalty unto death. To imagine Spartans and samurai facing one another is to imagine two different worlds colliding, the harsh, communal, militarized society of Sparta, and the refined yet deadly warrior culture of Japan. The question of who would truly win requires us to go deep into their training, their weapons, their values, and the very way they understood life and death. Let us begin with the Spartans. The Spartan warrior was not merely a soldier but a product of a system designed to strip away weakness and forge discipline like tempered steel. From the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and entered into the adage, a brutal educational and military training program. They were starved so they would learn cunning, beaten so they would learn endurance, drilled relentlessly so they would move as one in formation. By the time they reached adulthood, they were not individuals but extensions of a greater body, the phalanx. This was Sparta's greatest weapon. The phalanx was a wall of shields, each man's defense tied to the man beside him. To break one Spartan was difficult, but to break a phalanx was nearly impossible. It was a formation that required total trust, absolute obedience, and the courage to hold one's ground even as arrows rained down and enemies crashed against the shields. Spartans carried the aspis, a massive round shield, as well as the dori, a spear of about 7 to 9 feet in length, and the xiphos, a short sword used in close quarters. Their armor, made of bronze, offered both protection and intimidation. They were heavy, disciplined, and unyielding. Now let us cross the world to Japan and meet the samurai. A samurai was born into a caste of warriors, trained from childhood in both martial and cultural arts. They studied archery, horseback riding, swordsmanship, and later firearms. They practiced calligraphy, poetry, and meditation, not as distractions, but as ways to cultivate a mind that could remain calm under pressure and loyal to honor. Above all else, the samurai lived by Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code that demanded loyalty to one's lord, courage in the face of death, and self-discipline in all aspects of life. A samurai without honor was nothing. Their weapon of choice, the katana, was more than just a blade. It was a soul-made steel, curved and razor-sharp, capable of cutting with terrifying precision. They also carried the wakizashi, a shorter sword, and often a yumi, the longbow, which could strike enemies from great distances with deadly accuracy. Their armor, made of lacquered iron and leather, was lighter than the bronze cuirasses of the Greeks, allowing them speed and agility. They were masters of one-on-one combat, but also able to fight in formations under their daimyo's command. Already, we see two contrasting visions of what it meant to be a warrior. The Spartan fought not for personal honor but for the survival of his polis, his city-state. His individuality was erased, and his greatness measured only by how well he held the line with his brothers. The samurai fought for honor, for his lord, and for the ideals of Bushido, which elevated personal virtue alongside martial skill. He could fight in groups, but his legacy was also measured by his individual prowess, his loyalty, and his conduct even in defeat. If a Spartan's glory was in collective endurance, a samurai's glory was in living and dying with dignity. Now imagine the battlefield. On one side, a Spartan phalanx, shields locked, spears bristling like a forest of iron. On the other side, a group of samurai, their armor gleaming, their bows strung, their swords sharp enough to slice silk in the air. At a distance, the samurai might fire volleys of arrows, their yumi capable of piercing even strong armor. But Spartans were no strangers to arrows. At Thermopylae, they famously joked when told that Persian arrows would blot out the sun, saying then they would fight in the shade. Their heavy shields could absorb or deflect many missiles, and their tight formation allowed them to advance despite the storm. Yet the samurai were not like Persian levies. Their arrows were powerful, their aim precise. Could they weaken the Spartan line before it closed the distance? That is one of the first questions we must wrestle with. When the lines meet, Another contrast emerges. The Spartan spear, with its reach, could strike before a samurai's sword ever came near. In tight formation, the Spartans could keep the enemy at bay, driving forward with shield and spear. But the samurai, and like most foes the Spartans faced, were highly trained in adapting, in slipping between enemies, in dueling with swift strikes. Their katana could slash through less protected joints, and their agility allowed them to circle rather than smash headlong. Yet to do so, they would need to break the phalanx, and breaking the phalanx was not easy. Spartans had faced cavalry, archers, and countless foes, and their formation had held again and again. The question then becomes, which strength matters more, the collective discipline of Sparta or the individual mastery of the samurai? The Spartan way was to turn many men into one machine. The samurai way was to turn one man into a weapon of almost spiritual precision. Each path created warriors of extraordinary ability, but each with weaknesses. The Spartans struggled outside their formation, less effective in duels or chaotic battles. The samurai, while deadly alone, could not withstand crushing weight if trapped by many at once. The outcome of such a clash depends on terrain, numbers, and circumstance. In open plains, where the phalanx could advance as one, the Spartans might dominate. In forests, hills, or broken ground, where formations falter and individuals fight on their own, the samurai might carve through with terrifying efficiency. But beyond the battlefield, the comparison raises deeper questions. What is victory? For the Spartans, victory was survival, holding the line, protecting the city. For the samurai, victory was to fight with honor, even in death. A Spartan might fight to live another day for his polis. A samurai might charge into hopeless odds if it meant fulfilling his duty. One sought collective survival, the other personal honor. So in a way, even if they fought one another, perhaps both could win in their own sense, depending on how the story is told. And yet, to leave the question here would not satisfy. The fascination with Spartans versus samurai is not only about tactics or weapons but about the clash of philosophies. What happens when an unstoppable wall meets an unyielding blade? What happens when discipline faces honor? When endurance meets precision? When survival confronts dignity? This is why the debate endures. Not because we can truly stage such a battle, but because in imagining it, we glimpse two of humanity's most striking visions of the warrior's path. To truly understand who might triumph, we must take a closer look at the weapons themselves, not just as objects of war but as extensions of the philosophies behind them. The Spartan spear, the dory, was not simply a stick with a point. It was balanced with a leaf-shaped iron head and a bronze butt spike called the sworder, the lizard killer, which could be used to finish off enemies who had fallen or to plant the spear in the ground to stand upright. The length of the dory gave Spartans reach, allowing them to strike before a sword wielder could close in. In formation, this reach was multiplied, a wall of spears protruding outward, making it deadly to approach. Behind this, each Spartan had his xiphos, a short sword about 2 feet long, designed for stabbing and slashing when the spear was lost or the fighting pressed too close. It was brutal, functional, and never ornamental. Spartan weapons were not meant to be beautiful. They were meant to kill and to endure. The samurai's katana, by contrast, was as much a work of art as a weapon. Forged through repeated folding of steel, the blade was flexible yet unbreakable, sharp enough to cut through armor at vulnerable points. The curve of the katana allowed for drawing and cutting in a single motion, a technique known as ijutsu, giving the samurai speed in striking before an opponent could react. And like the Spartan xiphos, the katana was not a secondary weapon but the primary soul of the warrior. To lose one's katana was to lose a part of oneself. Alongside the katana was the wakizashi, the short companion blade, together forming the daisho, the great and small swords that symbolized a samurai's status. These were not only tools of war but emblems of honor and lineage. And unlike the Spartans, who standardized their weapons for collective efficiency, samurai swords were personalized, passed down, and revered. Then there is the question of armor. The Spartans wore bronze cuirasses, helmets with horsehair crests, and greaves that protected their legs. The armor was heavy but nearly impenetrable to simple cuts or thrusts. Combined with their shields, this made them like living fortresses, slow but relentless. The samurai's armor, called yuro or later dumaru, was crafted of lacquered iron and leather plates tied with silk cords. It was lighter, allowing agility, and designed to deflect arrows and swords without overly restricting movement. Where the Spartan armor relied on brute strength to endure blows, samurai armor relied on flexibility and clever construction to dissipate them. A katana might find weak points in Spartan armor at the joints, but a Spartan spear could pierce even lacquered armor if it struck with enough force. Again, we see not simply a clash of equipment but of philosophy. The Spartan trusted in strength and unity. The samurai trusted in precision and adaptability. Next, we must consider tactics. Spartans fought almost exclusively in the phalanx. This dense, rectangular formation was a living machine, each man's shield overlapping with his neighbor's, each spear thrusting forward in unison. It was not a formation for flexibility but for sheer dominance. Against enemies who fought as individuals, the phalanx rolled forward like a wall, unstoppable. The samurai, however, did not fight in such rigid formations. They fought in units under a daimyo's command, but within battle they prized the duel, the display of individual skill. A samurai might ride on horseback with a bow, loosing arrows before charging with a sword. Another might challenge an enemy officer directly, seeking honor in single combat. This flexibility allowed them to adapt to shifting battlefields but could also make them vulnerable to disciplined formations. Against a Spartan phalanx, would samurai precision and speed be enough to break through, or would their individuality be swallowed by the collective wall? Psychology also plays a role. The Spartan was taught from birth to fear dishonor more than death. To drop one's shield was the ultimate disgrace. Shields protected not just the bearer but the man beside him. A Spartan who fled doomed his brothers. Thus, in the phalanx, no man would run, for the cost was unbearable. The samurai, meanwhile, saw death not as disgrace, but as a path to honor if embraced for the right reasons. The concept of seppuku, ritual suicide to restore honor, reflects this. A samurai might willingly face impossible odds, even sacrificing his life in a final strike, if it meant loyalty to his lord or fulfillment of bushido. To a Spartan, the greatest victory was to endure as one. To a samurai, the greatest victory might be a noble death. Imagine then the clash of these mindsets: Spartans who refused to break ranks, and samurai who refused to yield even when overpowered. Such a battle could stretch into a brutal stalemate, each side unrelenting for entirely different reasons. We must also remember the role of environment. Spartans were masters of fighting on flat ground where their phalanx could operate effectively. On narrow passes, such as Thermopylae, their discipline turned geography into a weapon. Samurai, however, often fought in diverse terrain: mountains, forests, rice fields, and adapted with mobility. On horseback, with bows, they could harass and weaken formations before closing in. The question then becomes, where does this hypothetical battle take place? In a wide plain, the Spartans would likely dominate. In rugged forests or broken hills, the samurai's agility and ranged weapons might prevail. This again shows us that victory is not absolute but conditional. Finally, we must address the question of legacy. The Spartans are remembered not for conquest but for resistance. They did not build great empires like Alexander or Rome. They defended their homeland with unmatched discipline, and their story lives on because of their sacrifice at Thermopylae. The samurai are remembered not for a single battle but for centuries of service, loyalty, and the cultural mark they left on Japan. Their philosophy of Bushido influenced not only warfare but art, governance, and even modern ideas of honor. So, in asking who would win, we must ask who and at what. A single battle, survival of their culture, the shaping of future generations. Each left a legacy of steel, but also one of spirit. Thus, the debate rages on. Would the wall of shields crush the swift blades? Would the curved katana find its way between the bronze plates? Would honor or discipline prove the stronger bond? Perhaps the answer lies not in who would win, but in recognizing how both civilizations represent the extremes of the warrior ideal. They are mirrors of humanity's obsession with strength, courage, and meaning in battle. And it is precisely because both were so different yet equally extraordinary that the question of Spartans versus samurai refuses to die. Imagine, for a moment, a vast open plain under the blazing sun. Dust rises in the distance as two armies approach. On one side, the Spartans march in perfect rhythm, shields locked, spears angled forward, their bronze armor glinting like fire. Each step is measured, each man bound to the next by duty and by the unbreakable code drilled into them since childhood. On the other side, the samurai move with fluid grace, banners snapping in the wind, their daimyos giving quiet commands. Archers on horseback circle the flanks, ready to unleash a storm of arrows before the main force engages. The two worlds collide in a deafening clash of iron and wool. The Spartan phalanx surges like a living wall, impenetrable in its unity. The samurai charge, their katana flashing as they seek to find openings. Arrows rain down, striking shields, bouncing from bronze, occasionally finding a weak spot in the arm or thigh. But the phalanx pushes forward relentlessly, its rhythm unbroken. Here, on open ground, the samurai struggle to pierce the wall of discipline. Individual skill, no matter how great, shatters against collective strength. The Spartans would likely hold, their cohesion swallowing the brilliance of lone duels. Now change the setting. Imagine dense forests, where light barely filters through the canopy, and the ground is broken by roots and streams. Here, the phalanx is no longer effective. Shields cannot lock tightly, spears catch on trees, and formation crumbles. The samurai thrive in this chaos. Light on their feet, masters of sudden strikes, they dart through shadows like predators. Their archers fire from concealment, thinning the Spartan line before swords are drawn. Katana meets Xiphos in close quarters, but without the strength of formation, the Spartan loses much of his advantage. His bronze armor protects him, yes, but it also slows him, while the samurai's lighter gear lets him floor on obstacles. In the woods, speed and adaptability matter more than walls of shields, and here the samurai carve their path to victory. Then, envision a mountain pass, narrow and steep, where cliffs rise on either side. It is a place like Thermopylae, where Spartans once defied the might of Persia. Here, their phalanx fits perfectly, shield to shield, blocking the path. No cavalry can maneuver, no flanking is possible. The samurai must meet the wall head-on. Arrows are fired but have little room to arc. Samurai swords strike, but the shields absorb blow after blow. The Spartans dig in, immovable, their discipline unyielding. In this environment, the battle turns into a test of endurance. Could the samurai's determination and individual bravery wear down the Spartans? Or would the unbroken phalanx, as history has shown, stand until the last man? It would likely be a brutal stalemate, a fight of attrition where honor meets discipline in its purest form. And what about the clash of philosophies? Imagine a Spartan facing a samurai in single combat. The Spartan steps forward, spear in hand, shield raised, his body trained to fight as part of a whole but still deadly alone. The samurai draws his katana, the steel whispering as it leaves its scabbard. Both know no fear, both know no retreat. The Spartan lunges, his spear thrust swift and precise. The samurai parries, his blade slicing with speed born of years of ritualized practice. Each strike carries not only skill but the weight of two civilizations. The Spartan strikes for survival, for his brothers beside him. The samurai strikes for honor, for the code of Bushido. In such a duel, victory could swing either way. The longer spear gives reach, but the katana is faster once the distance closes. One mistake, one hesitation, and the battle ends in steel and blood. But perhaps the real question is not who would win in battle, but what each represents. The Spartans are the embodiment of unity, of strength drawn from the collective, where individuality is sacrificed for the greater good. Their victories were not the victories of one but of all. The samurai are the embodiment of individuality within honor, where skill, loyalty, and personal sacrifice define greatness. Their victories were not just battles but legacies etched in poetry, philosophy, and tradition. To compare them is to compare two visions of what it means to be a warrior, one a wall of shields, the other a blade of steel. So, who would truly win? The answer depends on the battlefield, on the conditions, and perhaps on what we mean by victory. On plains and narrow passes, the Spartans would likely dominate with their unbreakable discipline. In forests, mountains, and shifting terrain, the samurai would outmaneuver and outlast them. In duels, it could go either way, a deadly coin toss between reach and speed, armor and agility, discipline and precision. What we can say with certainty is that both left behind legacies greater than the sum of their battles. The Spartans gave the world a vision of collective duty so strong that their name still means discipline itself. The samurai gave the world a vision of honor so profound that their code still inspires respect centuries later. And maybe that's the true answer. Spartans versus samurai is not about who would win with weapons in hand, but about how both proved that strength is not just in muscle or steel. It is in loyalty, in honor, in the willingness to stand unflinching before death. And in that, both Spartans and samurai were undefeated.